Pleasure to introduce Neil Anderson, who will be speaking with us for the first half, and then a panel of students will be coming up, and it kind of just talking about their experiences on the Student Lifestyle Covenant, both positive, negative, and we would love to hear your guys' feedback as well. So give it up for Neil Anderson.
Great. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. This might sound a little strange to start this way. I had a dream about this last night. And in the dream, it's not like I've been thinking about this a ton. I mean, I'm prepared. But in the dream, I come to this point, and Stephanie hands me a whole pile of note cards, all different colors, all different shapes, with text on it. I'm like, what are these? She's like, you're doing a comedy routine. I'm like, what? She's like, these are jokes that students have written, and you're going to recite them to the audience. I'm like, this is the first time I'm seeing these in the dream, and she's like, just read them. That's what everyone's here for. And I woke up, and I'm like, what kind of strange, I don't know what that means. So if by the end you have some idea of what that means, you can let me know. But I'm really glad to be here, and that this isn't a comedy routine. This is about rules and boundaries and the lifestyle covenant. And it's something I'm really excited to share with you and talk to you about. We have 3 things we're going to do tonight, but I'm going to set that up in just a minute. What I'd like you to do to start, this is going to be interactive and a little bit more dialogue. So if you thought you're just going to sit back and get a chapel credit, I am going to have you engage a little bit tonight. Find one other person, and I want you to share, if in your family, wherever you grew up, one particular family rule, something that was just established in your household. It could be funny, it could be not funny, but one family rule in 1 minute. Go. Find someone and share that. Turn to a neighbor. All right. Anybody, you guys get a chance to share them? Anybody hear one you're like, that's interesting, that needs to be shared with the whole group? Family rule, yeah, Jerry. No gum in the upstairs. Is that because of like a carpet issue? Oh, interesting. All right. Ooh, yeah. Under my son's bed, there is a lot of interesting things that have been collected under there. And he doesn't chew gum yet, but now I'm going to consider that rule. What else? Any other interesting family rules? Chewy? Oh, that's interesting. I like it. And did she eat it? It would just sit there. That would have been very hard for me. Any other interesting family rules? Yeah. Wow. And how did you feel about that? Okay, yeah. Yeah. All white tennis shoes, all white socks. Very bright. Unless, that could be bad too on certain days. Any other family rules? No pants to church. Just dresses, skirts. I get them kind of mixed up, but not pants. I know what that is. That's great. So in my family growing up, we had 3 family rules that were sort of, I have 2 brothers, and they're twins. They're 18 months younger than me. So 3 kind of rambunctious guys all together in a small household. And over time, the 3 family rules that were established were basically a rule that emerged from each of us that was necessary to keep the peace. And if I remember them correctly, the first rule was everyone is in charge of themselves. That was because of me. Rule number 2, no fighting with words or fists. That's because my brother Blake. Rule number 3, oh no, the third child, and I've also forgotten the rule. Anyway, he had a rule because of something that he would do often. And these family rules would sort of just like cycle, they'd come up, and it's something that I remember, and at the time I really was like, this is so dumb we have these family rules. But most of us grew up in a family that had some type of rule, right? Raise your hand if you had rules in your family. Very, very common. I'm going to tell you two quick stories, and then we're going to get into the content. A story of a family with no rules, and then my own family. A story of particular experience that stands out for me when I was a sophomore in high school. The first story, my friend Chad. I remember Chad and I went to youth group together and became friends in junior high. And sometime into high school, like this is, did you guys like spend the night at friends' houses growing up? Okay. I don't know if that's like a weird thing that used to happen in the 90s when I grew up, but we'd spend the night at each other's houses, play games, hang out. And one night we got to talking about our families and those like moments of a little bit more something serious. And Chad shared with me something that really has still stood out to me now 20 plus years later, and that is that he had no curfew ever. And I'm like, Chad, your life is the dream. Are you kidding me? No curfew? But I realized as he kept talking about it, he was actually expressing it from a place of some sadness. He's like, I mean, it's cool, but my parents just don't care when I come home. Just don't care. I could come home at 1, wouldn't matter. Could come home at 11, wouldn't matter. Come home at 3 in the morning. I could not come home, and they wouldn't care. And I realized what I thought, like, to me, that was awesome. What if I had no curfew? I'd be living the dream. But he expressed it from a place of deep sadness, and I've always remembered how interesting that was because it totally blew my paradigm open. The converse of that was in my growing up in high school, every year of high school, we got kind of an extra hour onto our curfew. So I think my freshman year it was like 9 o'clock, my sophomore year, 10 o'clock, something like that. I don't totally remember, but I remember my dad said this particular night, just to remind you, curfew is 10 o'clock. And curfew goes by the clock on the microwave. Great, no problem. A specific clock in the house. Who had that? The particular clock was this was the microwave clock. I stroll in after a great night, hanging out with friends. I think I had just gotten my first car, was feeling independence and freedom. Open the door, look at the microwave, 10:01. Who cares? I'm close enough. And I go back to my room. My dad's sitting there. Neil, can you come here? I'm like, what? He's like, it's 10:01. Like, what? So? It's 10. It's 10. It's 10 by my watch. He's like, the microwave clock. And in the most calm, just controlled manner, it's 10:01. And expressed the consequences, but I don't even remember what they were. It was probably something like grounded or couldn't, I don't know, for like 2 weeks because I broke the curfew rule. And I was so angry inside. It's 10:01. I probably rolled in the driveway at 10 o'clock. And between the car and here, it turned to 10:01. And I spent 2 weeks in like a deep frustration about this particular experience because I felt like my dad was being overbearing, too strict. But I look back on it all the time and realize at some point it's 10, at some point it's 10:01, at some point it's 10:02, it's 10:03, and like where is the line? And he had just made it really easy for me to know the line is 10 o'clock on the microwave clock, on the microwave. So you got my family, and that didn't grow up in an overly strict house, just really clear boundaries. And you have Chad's family, just doesn't matter. And so what I want to explore tonight is a little bit of the why rules, why boundaries, why they exist. Take a little bit of a trip into Scripture to understand that. Talk about how they get formed, and then why we have particular rules and values and boundaries we have here at CCU. And I'm really looking forward to the panel afterwards so we can have some discussion and questions from you guys. So if you have something you're thinking of, you're like, I kind of want to ask this question, write it down, and we'll talk about it at the end. So here's where we're going to go. Foundation, where they come from. Framework, how we get them. Function, why we have them. So 3 Fs. I tried to make it memorable for me. Maybe you can help you. Foundation, framework, and function. All right. So where they come from. I'm going to propose to you that rules and boundaries are part of the fabric of what God has created, embedded into the very foundation of the earth at creation specifically. So Genesis 1 and 2. Anyone want to throw out something that might resemble a rule or a boundary from Genesis 1 and 2? Yeah. All right, we're going to get to, he stole the tree one. All right. Anyone else? Rules and boundaries that you can see in creation from the beginning? Yeah. Yeah. There's some clear separation, light and darkness, water, and is it sky? I can't remember. Some clear separation of what is in and what's not in. What else? There's some distinction of where the Garden of Eden is, right? There's some, this is the garden and this is not the garden, because when Adam and Eve get kicked out, they're leaving someplace. So there's probably some defining boundary that was, hey, this is what the garden is. I think the do not eat of the tree of good and evil is the first time in Scripture where we get a rule. Of all the things God created, what did he say about everything? It was good. It was good. When he made man and woman, it was very good. And then finally we come to this place where he creates the tree, and man has all the freedom to roam the garden, to work the garden, to use the resources for food, to eat, to enjoy. But there's this one tree that he can't eat from, and there's a rule: don't eat from this. And I believe at this point, what is so fascinating is that God gives us choice for the first time. In my relationship with humans, I'm not going to create them where they have no choice. I'm going to give them choice by actually giving them a rule. And by giving them choice, we can have a relationship. Because if I didn't give you any choice, that's not a relationship. That's just something I've created in my image that's going to do everything I've made. But if I can give you choice, I can have a relationship with you, because you have to have the option to disobey the rule, to break the rule, and we know that's what happened. If you fast forward a little bit, Exodus 19 and 20, you guys know what's in that passage? 10 Commandments, right? The 10 Commandments come in 20, but in 19, what we see in that is a picture of God's relationship with Israel. I saved you. I brought you out of Egypt. We have a relationship now. Because we have a relationship, here are some things that I expect that will reflect our relationship. And there's rules. The rules reflect the kind of community God is creating and separating Israel out as his chosen people. So from the very beginning of time, if we look at Scripture, we see there's part of the way the universe has been made, part of the way that God has interacted with us as people, that has this element of rules and boundaries. I think that's an important piece to start with, because it helps us understand where they come from. This is something that God has instituted. I think two things with this in mind. One, that they offer clarity and kindness. Imagine a universe with no rules, no boundaries, no separation of anything. Do whatever you want. I don't think that that's a world that we would want to live in. So in God's goodness, he creates boundaries. I think there's a lot of kindness in that. It's an expression of his love. What Chad didn't have was an absence of that. And also, I see it as the first creation of order, a great kindness to people, that we would have order in how we live, where we go, and how to have healthy relationships with one another. And I think this order is reflected into every society since then. Think about all the rules that create order in our current world right now. Does anyone want to throw out a couple examples? Rules that help us have order in our current world. I told you this is going to be interactive. The speed limit. Anyone get pulled over recently? Yep. Stephanie. Yeah, my wife got pulled over. It's okay, I think, if I share that. Yeah, speed limit, right? What else? Even just the lines on the street. This is where the road is and is not. That's kind of a rule and a boundary. What else? Anyone live off campus in an apartment complex? Anyone have an HOA? You know what that is? Housing something association? An HOA? It's a fee in townhomes, or if you guys look at apartments or you want to buy your first townhome, you'll want to see if there's an HOA fee. It's a fee you pay to live in that condominium community, that place, wherever it is. That also comes with a certain set of rules. Garbage has to be out on Wednesday. If it's not out, if it's still out on Thursday, you can get a $25 fine. Garage doors have to be down at 10 p.m. That's just almost every townhome condominium community has something like that, so that it reflects the kind of community that they want to have. Any other rules you guys can think of in our modern world that help us have order? My wife's a counselor, so she's so comfortable with silence. And it's like helped me be more comfortable with silence. One more example. Something was whispered. Don't kill anyone. That's a great rule. That helps us all live safely. And in a not like in a non-humorous way, there are places in the world right now where that is not a rule. It's just everyone for themselves. I grew up as an MK, and I was evacuated from the country I lived in when I was in third grade because the country broke into civil war. And if you had a gun, you had power, and you could do whatever you wanted. There were no rules in Somalia in 1990. There's no rules. It's just if you need to kill someone to have food, you do that. So rules are part of God's fabric of the universe. They lay the foundation for everything. So how do we get them? Let's move forward a little bit. I'm going to go through these last two a little bit faster because I want to get to the questions and interaction. Here's what I want you to do. Here's the section. Rules are both subjective and collective. Okay? Now I'm going to explain that in a minute. What I want you to do is to break into a group of 6. Okay? It can't be smaller than 6. It could be more than 6. And here's your prompt. This is pretty exciting. You have just been selected as the first 6 people to go to Mars. You leave tomorrow. Okay? That's the bad news. You leave tomorrow. And you're going to be on this mission for at least, does anyone know how long it takes to get to Mars? At least 3 days. I think that's to the moon is 3 days. So you're going to be on this mission for a couple years. And as a group of 6, you need to come up with just one rule that will help you govern your little mini society. Okay? Ready? I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do this. Go. One rule for your mission. Two minutes. Just one rule. Just one. You guys give up? You guys have a rule? There's no rules. That's the rule. Okay. Are you guys ready? Yes? No? We're going for it. It's time to launch to Mars. Whatever you got, that's the rule. Okay. Designate a spokesperson to just say with the one rule, and if you have a rationale, it needs like just 10 seconds. All right? We don't need like the Constitution on your rule. Who wants to start? All right, we'll start in this back corner. Sorry. I saw the hand first. Mariah, we'll start with you, and we'll just work our way around the room and then end with you guys up here, okay? What's your one rule? Respect others. No explanation needed. Next group. Live biblically under the new covenant, okay? Next group. We merged into one group. So we have respect others. Is that right? Live biblically. The golden rule. Do we know what the golden rule is? No, after like, let's give a little explanation for it. Perfect. Yep. All right. Interesting. Okay, over here. is, is is Chuddy the real spokesperson? Okay, go ahead. Say what the real one is. That was the real one. We're gonna go with don't talk about Fight Club. It's a long trip, and you don't want that to, cause dissension. What about up here? Did you guys come up? Above all else, love. Okay. Ooh, we got an organization right here. Delegate and communicate. What did you guys come up with? Ooh, don't do anything. You know what's interesting? I've never done this experiment before, but it worked perfectly. Everyone came up with a different rule. This is kind of interesting. You all had to decide what was the best one for your trip, for your little society. Everyone came up with a different one. So here's why I think this is just something that it may be difficult to deal with, but I think it's just reality and it's helpful for us to consider, is that rules and boundaries, they're always collective and subjective. And here's what I mean by that. When you put a group of people together, any type of society, any type of club, any type of organization, any type of city, you have to come up with something that governs the way things operate. And I think a lot of times we kind of get sideways because we think those things, we take issue with what that society has come up with. We take issue with what rules they've come up with, not realizing that if we were in that same boat, we would also have to, together with other people, subjectively come up with what we think are the most important rules for our fill in the blank, whatever type of group it is. Rules and boundaries, they're an expression of values. All of you had some value in what you expressed. And have you ever visited a town and seen like a community art piece or a neighborhood art, and it kind of reflects that community? Maybe you think that's cool or that's really interesting. It's an expression of values. And if you all had to do an art piece together, think about how much more unique and different that art piece would be. I think it's kind of a parallel to the rules and values, the rules and boundaries we come up with. They're decided by a community for a community. Therefore, what that means, in my opinion, is they're never, ever, ever going to do a good job at reflecting our personal preference. So if what I want is a personal preference reflected perfectly in a community's values, then I would be a community of one. That's the closest I can get. If everything I think and believe and the way I think the world should operate can perfectly be reflected, I can't do that with other people. The only way, David Brooks, anyone read much of David Brooks? He wrote a book called The Second Mountain, and he talks about this. It's a fantastic book. That in an individualistic society, which we are, the further we go into individualism, the more our personal preferences become our sense of identity. This is who I am. My preferences are who I am. Therefore, if you have a different personal preference, I take offense at that. Your rules offend me. Your rules keep me on the outside, and you're not good for my society, and I'm not good for your society. And what we do is, because we still long for community, what we do is we walk around and we try to find people that still have our personal preference, and he calls that tribalism. Tribalism is the deterioration of rules in a society that eventually lead to people being formed. We're kind of this way right now, actually, in the United States. You know there's tribes, right, that have certain value systems that are all based around a particular preference. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that we're never going to find a community that reflects our personal preferences. It's not realistic. And I think these two things help me understand the lifestyle covenant better. And here's why. If you agree that God has created order and rules and boundaries in the very fabric of the world we live in, and if you agree that rules are a subjective, collective experience that a community forms by a community for a community, potentially that could all help us understand the actual rules and values and boundaries of the community we're in right now. So this is what I called why we have them. And then we're going to break to the panel here in just a minute. I was going to have you guys help define this, but I think I'm just going to move on. They define in the lifestyle covenant what essentially is that document. Anyone want to try to summarize it in light of what we're talking about tonight? Yeah. Okay. That's good. Anyone else? How might we understand the lifestyle covenant in light of these two things we just talked about? Yeah. The simplest way I understand it is it's our expression of our community values, right? Knowing these things have to help us. It's in our expression. So why do we have them? They define what this community is about. And just to remember, it's subjective. This is not the only way a Christian community, a Christian educational community has defined them. In fact, I have found no lifestyle covenants of any Christian university identical, which is kind of interesting. Also, it helps us have clarity. I think a lot of times we think the lifestyle covenant or our rules, our handbook of rules, is something to follow in order to be more spiritual, in order to have a better standing in the community. But it's not that at all. And I hope if that's an issue that maybe you feel we can kind of dismantle that. But it does help us have clarity on what does it look like to relate to one another in this community. It provides structure to the experience so the community knows what to expect and how to function. And you can't have the benefits of a community without also having the boundaries. Think about this. You can't have the benefits of roads without signs, dotted lines, police to enforce them. Otherwise, it's sort of just chaos. Anyone ever drive in a country that has loose rules? It's a little scary, dicey. I'm actually really thankful that part of our transportation system is so well organized that for the most part, if everyone followed the rules, we'd be pretty safe. And I think this is also interesting. Our lifestyle covenant is necessarily optional, right? It has to be a choice. It has to be something that you assent to, that you agree to. You say, you know what? I think this is a community that's worth belonging to for the benefits I'm going to receive from it. Now, I think what's hard for students, just to speak really honestly, is I think everyone starts that way. But something can happen where we become a little bit of disillusioned, maybe even jaded, and it's hard for us to let go of the benefits because that would mean it's not worth being here anymore. So we sort of fight the rules and the values while trying to keep the benefits. And it's just kind of a miserable place to live, honestly. And you see this outside of CC, you see this in all kinds of places. But it has to be optional. You have to have option for these things to work. And finally, navigating the community experience is part of the Christian experience. It should be marked by grace and truth. So some of you are like, we got rules. You idiots that don't follow them should leave. That's all. That's not quite the right approach. And those of you like, rules are subjective, and my rules are my own rules. I want to be here. I don't have to adhere to your rules. That's kind of the other extreme. So navigating this community experience, it has to be marked by grace and truth. It has to be marked by understanding and patience. We have to help each other navigate the values that we adhere to, all right? So that's my framework for tonight. I want that to be our setup so we can have a good discussion. I'm going to invite Stephanie and the panel she's put together to come on up, and we will dive into making it maybe a little bit more practical.
Great job, Neil. Grab a chair for the panel. So this is Senate, or some of our senators. I'm Stephanie. I'm your student body president. And then we have Kaylin Mazzell. Here, let me get you guys mics behind. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we can start talking about your individual experience of the Student Lifestyle Covenant. So maybe say your position, your name, and what year you are. So, yep.
So I'm Caitlin Mazzell McDaniel, and I am the chair of the Student Standard and Accountability Board. So I serve on Senate as basically the secretary.
Hi, I'm hot mic. I'm Carly Bush. I am the Residence Life Representative on Senate this year and also our Athletic Committee Chair.
I'm Ryan Parmenter. I'm the Senior Class Representative on the Senate, and I'm also the Men's Ministry Coordinator. So that's fun.
Awesome. So yeah, just take a few moments to share your experiences of the Student Lifestyle Covenant, how it has gone since you've been here, both positive and negative experiences you might have had with it. And you've had to sign it as student leaders. You've had to sign it every single year, whether you live on or off campus. So Kaylin, do you want to start us off?
Right, so as the chair of the Student Standard and Accountability Board, I have kind of a unique role in I'm pretty familiar with the student handbook, so one thing I know quite a bit about is like student rights, and so if you fall into a number of check mark boxes and you end up appealing to the board for any reason, hopefully I would be able to guide you and help you and advocate for you. Actually, Neil, what you said about your friend who grew up with not many rules, that really resonated with me. That was a lot my experience, especially in high school. And I would say the same thing. I was like, my parents didn't care when I came home. In a sad way, for sure. I really longed for that, and I think that's why when I came to CCU, it was easy to accept the rules for me. And even I've heard it said before when talking about the rules, sometimes people say that at CCU you either have to be perfect or fake. And I was perfect when it came to following the rules. And there's a couple of things to say about that. I think the first thing would be that I was perfect when it came to following the rules, but if any of you guys knew me 2 or 3 years ago, you probably didn't like me that much. And I think a lot has changed since then. And I think how I've changed the way that I view the rules in the student handbook and the lifestyle covenant is rather than just viewing it as the rules to follow to get to some end goal, my entire mentality changed and I started thinking about what is the outcome rather than like what is the cause, and the cause is the rules and it's what we do and it produces an outcome. I started thinking about what is the outcome in itself. And so like I said, 2 or 3 years ago, when maybe I was more pretentious, less in tune with the people around me, I would say that was the fruit that was being produced even by following the rules. And ultimately, I think where I was a few years ago was completely out of touch with particularly vulnerable communities because I could elevate myself so much in my own mind. And I think that's what started changing my mind about just, again, the way I started thinking about the Lifestyle Covenant. And I think I have a really interesting place to speak on it from because I have followed the rules and I'm in this position where I deal with the rules all the time. And I think that's, first of all, just even a privileged place to be. And yeah, that's been, in short, like a lot of my experience with the Lifestyle Covenant. More recently, some of the rules that I've particularly been dealing with, and even on Senate, I proposed a bill that addressed the particular language around defending and advocating for a same-sex relationship. Because particularly that's one of the communities that I found myself cut off from and isolated from when I was following, I am following the rules, but when I was thinking about them in that way, as just things to be followed, not really thinking about the outcome. And so more recently, that's been my place of advocacy. And it's been a journey, and I'm really happy to talk more specifically about my personal advocacy for the LGBTQ community and how that's been with being at CCU.
Thanks for sharing, Kaylin. Carly, would you like to talk about your experience? Especially if Carly being an RA, there's a lot of RAs in here, but talk about your experience and then even maybe because you are an RA and you deal so closely with students in your stairwell, maybe negative or positive feedback you've heard from them as well, or in passing by in classes and stuff. So
Yeah, so I will say, if it wasn't for me being an RA, I don't think I would have known the reason of why some of the things in the Lifestyle Covenant are. And I think that's a really big part of kind of my whole view with the Lifestyle Covenant is growing up, I grew up in a divorced home from a very young age, and so rules were just kind of, you guessed where they were, and then if there was a boundary, you broke it, and then they were like, oh, no, that's not good. Like, we need to fix this. So it was more of, okay, let's just see what works in both of my homes. And coming to CCU and then reading the Lifestyle Covenant, it was almost a relief to me because I was like, oh, I finally have like these borders, these margins, this road to run in. I don't have to try to guess what I'm doing. So it was a little bit more of just a clarifying thing for me. I think specifically in my RA role, it's been really cool to learn a lot more of the why behind it, because a lot of the times some of the people that I've talked to in frustration of a specific rule or a frustration of a specific part of the Lifestyle Covenant, getting to sit and be like, well, why do you think it's there? And then getting to talk to them has been a really big blessing because it's even helped me process in that specific way. I think recently I have been open to a lot more conversation about it, because I think the moment that I was like, no, these are the rules. I think in high school people probably would have described me as like, oh, she's like such a rule follower, like she's a goody good, you know, like, because I'm not gonna lie, I really like rules, and my roommates make fun of me for this, but they're good, and let's find out why they're good. And I think recently just being able to have the conversations and accept like, okay, why do you feel this way? And I mean, I encourage all of you too in this room to like open up those conversations, because I think something that I've learned is whenever you harbor something that you're really frustrated about, specifically with rules like this that affect our community, it does not help anything. So, yeah.
Ryan?
Yeah. My perspective generally is that I like when expectations are clear. It's just helpful to know what you can and can't do, and then you don't have to worry about gray areas when it's like the clearer the better. That being said, I have gotten a couple steps in my day. The first one was definitely deserved. You know, I went out on the frozen pond with some friends, put a TV out there that was, you know, against the rules pretty clearly. And then the second one, I was pretty frustrated with when I first got it, because I felt like it wasn't fair. You know, I was rehearsing worship music with a couple D group leaders before our D group getaway, and it was in my friend Erica's room before 10 a.m., and we ended up all getting steps for worshiping the Lord. And I was like, what? This is like so holy. But yeah, it ended up, I was like, the reason for that rule, come to find out, is to respect their roommates and not have them be worried about walking around in like pajamas and like being comfortable in the morning before class or while they're getting ready for their day. And just that respect has always been a rule in my family and in the various places I've been, like in youth groups and everything. That's always like the one big rule is respect. And so I've respected that respect rule for a long time, and once I realized it was about that, it made a lot more sense. But yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you. Is there any questions out there for any of the panelists, or any thoughts on the Student Lifestyle Covenant that any of you guys have had, positive or negative experiences? Like Neil said, we want it to be very interactive. So any hands? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one little plug-in is come to Senate. So years ago, there was this thing called the Knowing Presence policy, and a lot of you, if you guys are RAs, you know a lot about it. There's still the non-dis, but there used to be a knowing presence. So if I told somebody that my friend went to a party and Kaylin told that person and that person told that person, anybody who just knew about it would get in trouble for not turning the person in, or basically anybody who knew in. And so it became this tattletale on each other and just a really hostile, unhealthy environment. And so 2 years ago, with John Vargas as the student body president, he collected a bunch of stories from the student body and made like a stack of different students' testimonies on the negative experience they had through the knowing presence and how they got steps, or just how it kind of ruined their year and led to like maybe mental health issues. And so we heard that as Senate. John heard that as the student body president, took that in. We compiled a bunch of the testimonies, brought it to Jim McCormick and Sharon Felker, and now it's changed or revamped. And we had a Senate Campus Ministries Forum with Pastor Dave, Heidi Ross, Kelly Nichols, and Elisa Shanks, and they all said that that might have been the best thing that has ever happened to CCU in creating a healthier culture. So, like, don't be afraid to change your rule or, step out of line and come and talk to senators or myself. Because maybe you're seeing something that others are seeing, and we can create a healthier, more happier environment here at CCU for community growth. And yeah, if you want to talk on it as well.
Yeah, and kind of what's actively happening right now is, like Stephanie was saying, similar approach. We're just in the beginning phases of just trying to gather data and student experiences on that policy that I was talking about before, concerning same-sex relationships. And so, again, we're in the initial phases of that, so we just think it's something that is so widely talked about outside of CCU, but not at CCU, and no one's asked students before. So we have an active poll, and so you can talk to me after, or any of those three over there, and they can give you a link to that poll if you want to give your input, any feeling about it.
Did you have a question over in the back? That's actually funny. I talked to I guess not funny, it's interesting that you said that. I talked to Dr. Usry at the beginning of the year about mental health in general, and just creating a healthy environment for students at CCU. And he is a strong advocate for the counseling center and mental health department. And he said, I don't think that it shouldn't be a matter of when or if it happens, it should be a proactive approach. So I would love to say it shouldn't have to take anybody. It shouldn't have to be one student. And that's why we kind of put on these character series. And I don't necessarily care about what the attendance looks like, because if we just reached one person, that made a difference in our community. And if one person asks a question and that changes for a policy, then that makes a difference. So it's really just being heard. Come to us, come to senators. I don't know if you guys have anything to say off of Joy's question.
Mm-hmm. I would say, too, being an RA and hearing some of the things that people are going through is sometimes, like, it's very eye-opening. Like, there's not one person that I've met that isn't going through something, has been going through something, or, will be. And that I want to thank you, too, for asking the question, because I think, like I was saying before, the more that we can communicate and talk, it's not so much like going out and complaining, but really asking questions like that and sitting here and talking and going through, okay, how can we be proactive in change, but not negatively impacting those around us? So, yeah.
And I would say, speaking on behalf of like the administration, just one person does matter, because we have seen a post on Instagram that drew out the administration and Senate's attention, and we brought that student in, and so that was just one student, and we were like, hey, what's going on? Like, we had never heard anything about this issue. Like, let's hear about your experiences and let's work through it. And ultimately, the administration wants to hear you, Senate wants to hear you, the student body and those around you want to hear you. So I would say it takes one, if not less, and just to be proactive. Yeah. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so like why essentially does administration get to decide our standards rather than having like at the bare minimum having students rather than we want our
Yeah, I hear you. And I think I hear Joy at the same time because I'm asking the same question as you are, Joy. Because I have heard the stories of people who have been hurt, and it seems like there's been more than one. And I'm asking, what's the deal? And I hear the deal is that these are the rules that there are. And they're not made by students, and that's part of why our poll isn't just student opinion, because we know student opinion is not, it's not going to change the rules. And what's interesting and complicated, and I would say from the administration's perspective, the answer would be that because what our lifestyle covenant uniquely does is uphold the biblical and the adjective sense of the word style of living. That's what kind of makes these things a little bit more complicated than just we want to hear people's pain and we want to hear people's hurt, because especially with the issues that I've been working with, what actually it comes down to is a theological discussion. It doesn't matter. It matters the stories, and that's what we're really trying to say is listen to the stories. And I mean, I just think what the answer you're looking for would be is that they're taking from a biblical approach, and it's not about student opinion.
You guys have anything to say on that?
I would say from experience, I think some of it, yes, I could see how it couldn't be about student opinion, but I would also say, like, back to what Stephanie was saying too, that the administration want to hear you. And also in that, know that what the boundaries so much in the lifestyle covenant were not made so much to hinder, but more to help. And so now that we are getting to experience them, and also we chose to sign, we can almost work with them too, which I think is what you're saying. And yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Oh, a couple hands. Yeah, we'll go back to Tyler. Yeah, I think one of the cool aspects that it's kind of fresh is Kaylin's approach with this coalition of testing it. And one thing that, like we were talking about the other day was that if you go to a state school, there's no room for students' voice at all. It is what it is when you go there. Now, there is less rules, but there's still some rules as well. But it's a state school. Their rules are like law. Where here, the student lifestyle covenant is just very malleable, and the administration or students, like, we just want to hear all around. And so that's why it's so important for the students to speak up and for you to come to Senate or us to come to you and hear your voice, because there is such a willingness of change. And maybe I just see it because I do work so closely with the administration. And every time I speak to Jim, it really is a yes, or in some way I'm getting a yes out of what I'm asking of him. And I very rarely actually get a no from the administration. So those are just kind of my thoughts of if there's like controversy or issues. We are testing it again, so the knowing presence changed. Nobody would have thought that would have changed. I didn't when I was a freshman. And then in addition, like we're trying a new approach with the same-sex relationships of changing or better defining the defending and advocating the LGBTQ community. And as of right now, it's going pretty smoothly, and we haven't had any issues. So.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that, because when it comes to like comparing this to a state school, there's a couple of different aspects. I think one, there is an element. I mean, I see so many stories from people at state schools doing things like sit-ins and protests and a lot of higher levels of activism. And for me, I'm like, we need to be doing that. Why aren't we doing that? Why is it so hard for me to get people to respond to a poll, much less attend a sit-in? Because I get it's hard because you're actually in the face of punishment, where at a public school, the administration is so reliant on your dollars and more students coming in that you're their customer. And here, they're concerned about donations in some aspects and how we look to certain other people. And so it can feel like it's harder to not have to worry about getting repercussions or even getting kicked out. And so I understand why activism is harder, but I would also say I do echo Stephanie in the fact that it is so scary to stand up and to say something. I get it. But gosh, you guys, we need to. I'm just so tired of the complacency that we talk about policies, we complain about policies, but I mean, let's get some activism.
Yeah, and then just really quick off of that, I do think with the state school, if you break a rule, like if you are caught plagiarizing, you are kicked out of the university. Where if you're at CCU, I've met students who have gotten caught for plagiarizing, and I know that sounds smaller than maybe some of the other issues, or maybe not, I don't know. And CCU works with you, and so it sounds cliche that their kind of mission statement is to promote grace and truth, but I do think that CCU balances both grace and truth, where we hold you accountable with the truth and the standards, but at the same time, I'm not really seeing a lot of students get kicked out, and when they get in trouble, it's more of a, hey, how are you? Like, what's actually going on? Like, why did we make this choice? And they use a lot of grace with you, and I think that also goes along the lines of we promote truth through like following the rules, like Moses. If you've been with Miller, it's like, oh, we're not followers of Moses, we're followers of Jesus. And I would love for CCU to hear a little bit more of that, and even for the administration be a little bit more intentional about being more so followers of Jesus Christ, of grace and love, and not followers of Moses and these standards and rules. Was there a question in the back over there? Did you have one? Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Ryan. Yeah.
punishing them. Because all that does is create resentment and bitterness. I know because, I've been here for the past 4 years. It's kind of trash. And people end up looking at CCU as a regretful experience as opposed to one that grew them in love and community.
Yeah, that's a great. That's a great point. Do any of you guys have anything to say on Joy's comment?
I do, and it kind of ties in the 2 points that you brought up about questioning our faith and about then what are the fruits that we're looking for. And I remember having like a deeply personal moment and thinking, okay, I'm talking about this whole cause-effect thing. I wish I only knew what the effects I was supposed to be seeing were. And it's like, oh wow, it's not like that's laid out for us or anything in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And it's like, especially for the standards of what a Christian is, to me it seems like that's the answer of what should these rules be producing. And what I'm hearing you say and what I'm saying at the same time as you is I don't see it producing those things often. And that's not the measuring stick that I see it being measured by on a personal and individual level, much less a macro level often. So I hear you.
And in addition, just like that would also be an instance like where with Ryan's, if he felt like he wasn't given a fair like trial or and was given an unfair punishment, that is where you go to the SSAB and kind of plea your case, and they make a final say in not getting steps, less steps, and they dive deeper into that case. So that's what we're here for as far as Senate and SSAB. I know it sounds like a plug, but truly, I want to hear like your guys' stories and stuff. Yeah.
You keep bringing up same-sex relationships on campus and like the language you're trying to change around that, and I was just wondering if you could go into more detail about like what is actually going on and like what you are actively doing.
Right. So right now the student handbook, I think on page 98, talks about the prohibitions in regards to sexuality, and there's a specific line about homosexuality, and it says same-sex relationships are prohibited, semicolon, as well as practicing, advocating for, or defending a same-sex relationship. And personally, I am on an outside of CCU group that advocates unequivocally for LGBTQ students in the CCU community. But what I've done in my official role has been to come before Senate and propose an inquiry into gathering student perspective on that aspect of the rule, specifically defending and advocating for, because there is a wide array of confusion about what that implies, what that even means when it comes to advocacy and defense of a same-sex relationship. So the first step, what was actually proposed to Senate, was to just ask students and to have some sort of push behind it. And so that's what we're doing right now. When we get the responses, it's kind of hard to figure out what the next step is, but in this capacity, that's what that looks like.
Yeah.
I think to the point earlier about when you bring questions about the rules up, people can wonder where your faith's at, if you're even considering switching them. To the point of the Coalition for Change with same-sex relationships, the survey came up in our room, and most of my roommates were like, there's no way that's actually anonymous, I'm not filling it out. And people may have an opinion that's different, but genuinely won't share it because they know it's on the outs here.
Well, it actually really is anonymous, and we've
Yeah, it's
gotten
really frustrating because we've gotten some bad responses.
yeah, we've gotten some responses. We're like, man, who wrote that one? Because we'd really like to read that one through, and we can't even see it. But how many? You said 100, almost 170 people have responded to that. So it really is anonymous, and whether you take that by word or not, it's how you want to take it. And I want everybody to feel safe. So if you still don't feel safe to respond to that or fill out that QR code, then don't. And maybe you have a friend do it for you. And we're all about promoting a safe place here at CCU. So thank you for that feedback, though. Yeah.
For Caitlin, I think a lot of the reason you're probably not getting people who want to do the sit-in and stuff like that is because there are groups of us who have tried to say things, who have tried to do things, and instead the response we get is to get pushed out, shouted down, or whatever else. So I think there are a lot of people behind you, but we have to
Yeah, absolutely. I talk with, John Vargas, not the first student body president, but first when I was on Senate, he formed a relationship with Dr. Elisa Shanks, and that's how he got rid of the knowing presence. And then Ben met with her a little bit, not as much, and then I've met with her quite a bit this year, and we're definitely working through a lot of it, and we're also listening to the feedback that we got last week at our character series on mental health. And that's where we had Dr. Elisa Shanks, Jonathan Demos, and we had a good handful of the counseling center interns that broke up into small groups, and you could go individually or in a small group with counseling center interns and Dr. Shanks, Demos, and talk about mental health issues. It's definitely something that I'm pursuing as well, in hearing and trying to promote that growth. Because ultimately, I think it's just fishy how the aspect of, we wonder why the counseling center is out the door. It's because that's the only safe place students have to go and speak on something that they're breaking in the student lifestyle covenant. And so I have definitely been wrestling with how can we strategically make either the counseling center larger, or what can we do on campus. And so that's where we're starting with the language in the lifestyle covenant, because I find that the language in the lifestyle covenant, I believe in rules, I do, but the language maybe could be tweaked in order for students not to feel like they have to bottle things up, and the only safe place they have to go is the counseling center. And so I think that would alleviate a lot from the counseling center, and creating small groups. So I talked to Elisa, and the top 3 issues we have, or they have at the counseling center, is anxiety and depression is number 1. Number 2 is sexual unwanted sexual touching or activity. And then 3 is, I think it was same sex. And so that's where we are taking the approach on the last 2. And I've talked with some students on what would it look like if we created a group on campus who have either been sexually assaulted or know a friend that's been sexually assaulted, and creating a small, healthy space to talk about that and not get in trouble for it, as well as, and that's kind of the same thing with the same sex. So we're brainstorming for sure, and then so that's kind of just my input on it.
Yeah, we have been actively working to try and get an LGBTQ group in the counseling center, but the problem is that technically, could Elisa Shanks get in trouble for supporting those students?
So I actually asked her,
don't know.
and last week, and she said that if somebody in the counseling center comes up to her and opens up to her that they struggle with same sex, or that they have same sex attractions, that she then will refer that student or those students to our group as well. And so we're creating a healthy group off campus and seeing those students. So any other questions regarding it could be anything under the sun.
I also did want to say really quick.
Yeah.
So a couple questions ago, on I think it was kind of your experience with STEPS. I do also want to say, just because I am an RA and I get to know a lot of the RDs on campus, there's a lot that goes into, okay, how many, and just there's like a whole process as well. And I think after getting to know them, having a semester of being an RA2 under my belt, it's really interesting to even hear that, because I didn't know that coming in either. So there's just a lot that goes into that as well.
Any other questions? If not, we can close it out. Awesome. Oh, yep, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm so glad that Senate is putting this on. And as an administrator, you guys are asking really, really good questions. Really good questions. And I hope you feel like you can ask these questions. I don't know personally, I've only been at CCU a year and a half, anyone that has been dismissed for expressing a disagreement with a rule. Because that's not a rule. You cannot disagree with the rule. I don't know anyone. So I hope you feel like maybe this thing that you guys are putting on actually is functioning as a space to provide feedback, to figure out how can we advocate for a change that we want to see happen. Where can we go? You guys are providing some incredible opportunities for that. And administrators, the more you get to know them, the more you might realize we really want to hear the things you guys have to share. So I think you're asking great questions, and I'd be happy to talk, more offline if anyone wants to. But thank you. Thank you for the things that you guys are putting on, and I think this is a really good conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And feel free to reach out to any of us before, after, or like down the road through email or Instagram. And take the survey with these guys if you'd like. Feel free. And thank you for coming. And that was the end of our character series. Thanks, guys.